Hello again, and welcome back to Educator.com's Advanced PHP with MySQL course. In today's lesson, we're going to be continuing development of our web application, incorporating what we learned in our last lesson about static methods and class constants. In version 9.0, which is the version of the web application that we're updating to, we're actually going to be creating an entirely new class called Output, which we're going to use to contain some static functions that are basically helper methods that are used to perform some simple or some useful HTML output functions. We're also going to be changing. Previously, we have a build item object and a build department object function in our file library that is used to basically build up a department object or an item object from a string that's read from items.txt or departments.txt. We're actually going to be moving that functionality into each respective class and call it a build object method. So for example, item is going to have a build object method now. It's going to become a static method, and it's going to perform the same functionality, but it's going to be a static method within the item class. Likewise for the department class. So first off, we have the output class that we've created, and it contains a couple of static methods for performing some common HTML output tasks. For example, a drop-down menu is something that's commonly a common HTML output. For example, and what we're going to be doing in this version is we want to select an item from the database and on maybe an admin page. And actually, I'll just go to the page that we're going to show you. In our administrator website, for example, what we're doing is we're creating drop-down boxes that allow us to select the item that we want to add to the department and the department that we want to add it to. Previously, we just had a text box where we were able to enter the item ID. Well, now what we're doing is dynamically generating these select boxes by reading from our store database from those flat files and then generating those. And we're using these static functions to do that. So we have a general static function that we're creating called output HTML selector, which will return a well-formed select tag containing all the options that you specify for it. We're going to look at that more in a second. And then we have two specific functions, static functions, for outputting a department selector to select any of the different departments in the store, and also an item selector to select any of the different items in the store. And both of these methods actually call this generic output HTML selector method in order to be able to do that. So if we go take a look at our new output class, we can see, for example, we have an output HTML selector class. It's a static method, and basically what it does is it builds up a select tag. You provide it two parameters. One is the name of the select tag, and a select tag is an input tag, so it has a name, so that when you submit the form that it's on, it's going to associate whatever option is selected with this name. So it's going to associate the value of the option selected with this name. So you pass it the name. Then we also pass it an array of options, which is going to include the value that we want to include in the value attribute of each option, as well as the text that we'd like to include. So for example, if we look at our administrator website, here what we have, let's actually look at the source code. We can see that the output of this function is we create a select tag with name item ID, and then for each option value we've set the value equal to, we've read it from the database, and we'll look at that in a second, the item ID, and then we've output the name of the item and its item number as the text of the output of the option, the text of the option tag. So, for example here, option value, and basically the way the options array, the format that the array needs to be in is it's an associative array where the keys are the values that you want to include as the value attribute of each option, and the values of the array as the text that you want in the body of each option. So you can pass it that any name in any array of any name value pair or ID, or excuse me, value and body and option body text pairs. It'll go ahead and generate all those options. It'll close within a select tag. It'll close it out, and then it'll return that whole string, the select tag with all the different options in it. So what we actually do is we make use of this in two other static methods. One is called output item selector, And what we do for that one is we load all the items from the database. This getItems method, as we know, returns an index array of item objects of all of the items in our database. And then what we're going to do is build up an options array to pass to this output HTML selector method that we just looked at. So basically what we do is the keys of this options array are what we want as the values for each option tag. So what we're doing is for each item that we pull from the database, we're setting the key in this options array equal to its item ID, and then we're setting its value equal to a string that contains both the item's ID and the item's name. So when we look at it, you can see we have the item ID is 1001 and then the name. And so we do that for each item in the store, and it's going to build up this options array. And then we call that static method, and here we're using the self keyword. And as we learned in the last lesson, that's how you call a static method from within another class method, or that's how you call a static method from within another method of the same class. So we have self followed by the scope resolution operator by the name of the static method we're calling, in this case output HTML selector. We want that select tag, we want its name to be item ID, so that when the form gets submitted, whatever value is chosen is going to be associated with the name item ID. And then we're going to pass it this array of options that we've built up, which contains values for the option tags, which are the items IDs, as well as what text to output, which is a combination of the item ID and the item name. Now we've also done the same thing, basically exactly the same thing for departments. We load all the departments from the database into an array, and then we build up an options array. And what we do is we set the key of each option array to be the department ID of each department, and then the text that we're going to have for each department is going to be the department's ID followed by the name. And then again, we call this static output HTML selector that's in the same class as this method is defined in. So we use self and the scope resolution operator. We give it the name department ID, that's the name we want the select tag to have. It's the value we want for its name attribute. And then we pass it the options that this options array we've generated that contains department IDs as the values, and then a string of the department ID and the department name as the text. So when we go and look at this, we can see that our output is the department ID followed by the department name. And so what we can do now is, instead of having to just type, knowing what an item ID is and having to type it, we're able to, and this will change anytime we add a new item to the database. It's going to automatically update it to do here to this select box, because this select box calls getItems, which draws from the database. So for example, let's just show what this looks like first. For example, if you look at our store in the sporting goods department, we have two items, a baseball bat and a basketball. Now let's say, just for fun, we want to add the winter jacket to that sporting goods department. Well, we simply select winter jacket and sporting goods, add to department. It's going to say winter jacket was successfully added to sporting goods. If we go back and refresh our sporting goods page, we can see that winter jacket is now in that department. So it's the same functionality we've had before, but we've made it easier to use. Now let's say we go ahead and add another item to the website. Let's see, soccer ball. $25. Give it a description, pick a random image. I'll just give it the image of the basketball, since that's the one we have on here. Add the item to the store. The item was successfully added. It's been assigned a new number. If we go back and we look at the store, we can view our cart. We can see that this soccer ball item has been added. It's item 1007. However, you'd think it'd be in the sporting goods department, but when we go to sporting goods, it's not in there because we haven't added it. With our new interface, now when we click Add Item to Department, it's going to automatically load that new item. Refresh the page. And now we can see that soccer ball has been added to the list. So we've basically dynamically generated this list where we can select any item we want from the store. It's quite a neat feature, and we can add it to our sporting goods department. Click Add to Department. If we go back and refresh our sporting goods page, we can see that that new item has been added. So basically we've taken the same functionality, but we've made use of these static functions that we've included in this output class to dynamically generate these select tags. And so basically what this class is, this output class, if we look at the source for it, is simply just a class of public static functions that you call using the, actually I haven't shown you how to do that. If we go look at add item to department, previously we just had text fields for each of the item, for the item ID and the department ID. Now instead of outputting a text field, we output these select boxes. So if we go down here, we can see in the same spot, now we're actually calling these static methods defined in the output class. So we're saying call the static method output item selector defined in the output class and output the result of that method. In this case, it's going to be a select tag. We do the same thing down here for the department. Call the static method output department selector in the output class and return its and output its value. And here again, the way we access static methods from outside the class definition is by typing the name of the class, followed by the scope resolution operator, and then the name of the function that we want to call in its parentheses, and if optional, any parameters. So basically, that's how we make use of this output class. And this is something, these are functions that we just could have added to our, for example, we already have an output, a lib file. We could have added these functions to here as well, but this is sometimes you'll see that classes are defined with just a bunch of static methods in them. It's basically a different way of doing things, and so we're showing you that you can have some output functions just as regular functions defined in a file library, or you can have them defined as static methods within, for example, an output class. So the other main thing that we did in this version of the web application is we didn't get rid of, but we moved the build department object and build item object methods that were in our file library into, we made them static methods called build object within the item and department class. So for example, close this. In our previous version of the web application, we had in our file library, we had build department object that would basically would take an array of information extracted from a line in departments.txt. It would build up it would create a new department object, and it would basically, by reading the information from the array, for example, it would set the name of the department, and it would set the item ID of the department, it would set the name of the department, and then it would loop over each of the different IDs and add those to the department using the add item method. Similarly, for build item object, we'd pass it an array of information extracted from a line in items.txt, and we would simply just build up an item object using the item constructor and then return it. What we do in the new version is, you'll see in our file library, those functions no longer exist. And if we go, for example, and look at item.php, in our item class, you can see we have a new function called build object. It's a static function that returns an item, object, or false if there's an error. And it takes a string, which is an item string. So actually what we've done is we've added the part that when you read from before what we had been doing is reading from the items.txt file, using the explode function to take all of the data fields into an array, and then passing it to our build item object function. Now we're just making it so that we're just passing a line directly to this build object method. So we pass it an item string, and which, if you remember, is generated. These item strings that we output in our file are generated by the toString method that we had added in a previous version of the web application, and that defines all of the way that an object will be represented as a string, and that's how we store them in our file. So this, whereas toString sort of converts an item object to a string, this build object is going to take that item string, turn it into an item object. And so we have the static method build object, and you just simply pass it an item string. It calls explode on the item data, and then it goes ahead and builds the object and return it. Now, one thing that you may notice is that the other thing that we've done is we've moved the data separator constants from config.php into the item class. So for example, if you look at the item source code, we can see that now there's a constant declaration here const keyword, followed by the constant name data separator, and then followed by its value. So here, instead of having a file in a constant defined in config.php that's called items underscore data underscore separator, we just define a data separator function within an item class. And then when we reference it using the scope resolution operator. And what you can see is we have, and the way you do that is, in this case we actually haven't used the self method, we've used the item, we haven't used self in order to do it, we've actually just done the class name, which is another way of doing things. So you have the class name, followed by the scope resolution operator, followed by the name of the constant that we're getting. And so that's how we're able to access that class constant. So we've done the same thing for department, for our department object. If you look at the source code for it, the department object actually had two data separator constants. One was to separate each of the data fields, and then as we know, all the items and item IDs in the department are separated by commas, so we have an item ID separator. We've created constants, moved them out of config.php, moved them into the department class. And then we've also created this static build object function that basically takes in a department string that was created from the toString method of the department object. We explode that string based on the data separator. We go ahead and we start building up the department object, and then we explode that third field, which is the array of, is the comma delimited list of item IDs, and then we add each item to the object, and we return the department. So basically what we've done is we've taken that method that was in our function library, moved it into our class library. And in a way it kind of makes sense because it's something that's related to a department object, and you know, one of the points of having class is to basically locate common functionality related to a common theme or subject into one area, in this case our department class. If we have a function that's going to build an object, a department object, it makes sense to have it in the department class. In this case we make it static so that you don't actually have to have an instance of the class created, because all we want to do is we already have a department string and we just want to build an object from that. So we don't need to access instance variables, so we've created this static method. So if we actually go and take a look, there's a couple of different methods where we've made use of this new function, and we'll take a look at some of those. So for example, if we go to item exist, what you can see is what we've done is now we loop over, basically in this function we loop over each line of the file, and we test to see if the item ID in each line is the item ID that we're looking for. And this method takes a string that's an item ID that you're searching for. So basically what we do now is we read a line from the file, and then we call this static method build object on item, and we pass it the line. Now that line represents an item object string. As long as that item object string is well formed, meaning it come from the toString method of the item, this will return OK. And what that's going to do is it'll create that new item, and then we can actually access the item ID in that item object that was built up, compare it to the item ID that we're looking for, and if it's the right one, then we can break out of the loop and say, okay, the item has been found. Exist equals true. Then the same thing for department exist. We've also used it, for example, in get department. We use it in get department, get departments, get item, and get items. Basically, when we get for example, in get department, we're extracting a line from the departments.txt, and we're building a department object out of it and returning that. So what we do is we read each line from the departments.txt file. We go ahead and call our new static method build object. We pass it the line in the file, which is a string representation of a department object. This static method will build a department object out of it. It'll return it into this department variable. We test to see if the ID of that department is the ID that we're looking for, and if so, it's been found, and then we can just simply return this department variable because that contains the object that was built by build object. And so that's how these get department, get items, get departments, and get items method works, is by using these new static methods that we've incorporated into the class. So basically we've taken build item object, build department object, moved them into their respective classes, rename them build object. You don't need to, and the reason is we're not calling it build department object, because then the way you would call it would be department : build department object, and it's kind of redundant. So we're just saying department, build object, and then we're able to pass it a department string. So this build object is sort of the analog of the toString method we created in a previous version of the web application. And in that case, we had also moved the, we used to have a create item data string, create department data string. We moved that into the class and made that into the toString method. So basically, we're taking common functionality related to a department, related to an item, and focusing it and putting it all in that one class so that it's in a related spot. And so that's, and what this shows us is that shows us an example of a static method, because this build object is declared as a static method. And it actually shows how we have, for example, our department class, our item class. Unlike the output class that only has static methods in it, our item class and our department class actually have instance methods. They have instance properties. Well, now we've added constants to them, and then we've added the static method build object. So this shows how we can have an object that has instant methods and instant properties, but also can have a static method to be called. So that ends today's lesson. Thank you for watching educator.com. I look forward to seeing you next time.